Welcome back to the Hishaku Hideout, a weekly podcast where we talk about the latest chapter and everything Kagurabachi. I'm here with Dice.
Yo, yo, yo.
And today we're getting into chapter 71. Dice, how'd you feel about the chapter?
I actually enjoyed this chapter more than I would have thought, considering it's really mostly a flashback and just some context, or more like a Yori's backstory with her father. I thought the pacing was obviously a bit slow, but in terms of for what it is, I really enjoyed it. And I really think it, like Yori, it's not like I had an issue with her as a character, but I do see this episode starting to carve out like kind of what separates her or what makes her unique compared to some of the other characters we've previously met. And so, yeah, I like this chapter.
Yeah, I thought it was, it's one of those things where we start off right where we left off, where all the memories came flooding back. And, I guess we're seeing that in the form of this chapter here. One thing that I think is really interesting that I think a lot of people are going to bring up is the fact of Inori, Iori's mom, Inori. She brings up her sister also working for the Kabunabi, and she, is too busy to watch her. As we know, same face syndrome is kind of strong in Kagurabachi, so I'm sure a lot of people are going to try and make the connection of Inori's sister being the Kabunabi head, female Kabunabi head, excuse me. But I don't necessarily think that's the case. What do you think about that?
I'll be honest, I hadn't really thought of it since you brought it up. My memory tends to be horrible, especially when it comes to faces and certain characters previously introduced that aren't really recurring. And so we talked a little bit about this before we started recording. And yeah, I do think their faces are kind of eerily similar in terms of like the eyes, the mouth, and the overall shape of the head. Which, like you said, it could very much be just same face syndrome as we see in not just this, but a lot of manga. But I can't help but kind of leave that door open. I personally think that there's a clear implication for who Inori's sister is that I'll bring up kind of later in this episode. But you just never know with Hokozono, right? And so considering the fact that she's brought up as like you said, mentioned clearly as a member of the Kabunabi. You just never know, right? But I personally wouldn't be led to believe it's her right now.
Gotcha. I'm wondering who you're talking about, because when I read this chapter, the first person that popped up for me was thinking about the Kabunabi leader. And of course, there's always the looming possibility that she could be one of the members that took out Kunishige. But, that's going to be an interesting, reveal as we get further into the story about which members of the Hishaku were actually there, for the Kunishige killing. But, other than that, we can talk about that later in the episode when you get to what your thoughts are. 'Cause we could just kind of get through the chapter a little bit, because there's not a whole lot to talk about. It's really just, we know, what was it said, 9 years ago, was it? Yeah, 9 years ago.
Oh, 9?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. 8. Yeah, she's 8. It's 9 years ago. I apologize.
Oh, no worries. So 9 years ago, we see that, Samura was a stranger to her then, just because of his, past trauma. Samura's he has a good heart. He's just troubled by his, he's haunted by his past. I can't hold my daughter with these hands. We see he does care about her. It's just that he has disdain for himself and his past actions, that he just can't picture him raising a child, with the blood on his hands.
Yeah, and I really like that about his character. I don't think any of this is really surprising, even considering some of the theories you had brought up earlier about him gouging his own eyes out or cutting them out because he couldn't bear witness to his own actions, which even if not true, even if it's ever revealed to be true or not true, I think in itself is still a pretty engaging theory and makes a lot of sense. And we even see later on in this chapter, which we joked in previous episodes about Yori closing her eyes, imitating her father in order to replicate what she's seemingly learned. Even before she's learned anything, we see her in this chapter kind of close her eyes, because it's like it's what little kids do, right? They only emulate what they've seen. And so, like, going back to like the whole thing with Samura not being able to kind of forgive himself and walk past his own previous actions, it only makes him more likable, really. Like I said, this isn't really much of a surprise personally, but I do think seeing his interactions with his daughter and seeing his like inner conflict only elevates him in terms of like writing quality. And so I think it's gonna make for their reunion to be a lot more impactful.
Oh yeah, it's for sure to be it's gonna be interesting how that like reunion happens, because I can picture it being one, is a tearjerker. It could be for multiple reasons why it's a tearjerker. It's Hokuzona's good about leaving himself enough avenues to take the story in different directions, with like Samura popping up and seeing something happen to Iori, or he pops up and saves you. There's so many different like ways he can take this. I think the thing that I get excited about for Kagurabachi is not being able to like pinpoint what Hokuzona is really gonna do with a certain character. You know what I mean? He does a good job of giving himself a back door, especially with like Iori as a character. What do these memories mean for her going forward? And how much does she actually remember? Was she actually eavesdropping on the visitor that came to see Samura at the end? We don't know exactly like what all she knows.
That's interesting, right? Because I'm not sure. I hadn't really thought of what you just said in terms of Iori witnessing kind of Yura's presence. But I wouldn't be surprised if that is the case, right? Before we kind of get there, going back to Samura just really quick, I think one of the things that I do really enjoy from this chapter that once again only elevates him as a character in my eyes is the fact that the way he respects, and maybe this isn't anything really out there, right? But it's just kind of like a subtle detail about him as a person and as a character, is the way he's able to respect Yori's moms, and not just obviously keeping his word in terms of raising Iori, but we see how he behaves towards her mom, and even considering the fact that she doesn't seem to be all that kind towards him in terms of like considering what he's been through. Like, you would think that she would be a bit more sensitive to why this guy is the way he is, right? Since he's essentially a PTSD ridden vet when you think about it, right?
Yeah.
And so that sort of empathy isn't really there from her part. From the little we see, right? They clearly have had a strong relationship in the past, and ultimately, I guess just what I like to see is him not just taking on the responsibility of raising his daughter, but also finding a way to kind of just stay, because I do really like how they engage in like the whole cooking competition in order to kind of satisfy the mom and everything. And I just thought that whole dynamic was really well done, right? Because they developed like a nice little rivalry. And I don't know, it's sort of like these a subtle behavior that just goes a long way when you're able to look back and appreciate it. Maybe I'm just kind of reading too much into it, but I do like, once again, how the theme of family is tackled here with Iori.
And you did kind of bring something up, and I when I was reading this, I kind of also felt the same way. I was like, man, like for what Samura has went through, it's kind of low-key crazy for Iori's mom to badmouth like Samura in front of him, like not in front of him, but like to her, like, oh, he forgot about us, or he's stuck in the past, and all that. Like, that's it's not like he's a deadbeat trying to, it's not like he's Toji Fushiguro, you know what I mean? And I think what this like kind of plays on, and maybe I'm looking too much into it, but as you said something, I was thinking like the panel where Inori is like, that's enough, let it go, it's time to look forward, not back. Like, because you see Samura's face is just like, taken aback. As far as they all know, he's a hero. We see everyone at like the dojo, say your father's an amazing guy. Just because with him and the other blade wielders, what they did is seen as, service for your country, but they're not the ones that have to like go to bed with the demons at night. You know what I mean?
Dude, 100%. I mean, I would argue that even if you look at it from the other angle, it works like just as well, or is just as impactful, if not more. Like, I could totally see a scenario where Inori is aware that, let's just say that, she's aware of the propaganda being fed, right? We've all discussed, like we've been discussing for a while, how the truth of the Seitei War is clearly not what it seems, most likely. Excuse me. And so I wouldn't be surprised if she is aware of maybe not the complete truth, right? Because we don't even know to what extent, we just don't know what's how accurate what's out there is, right? So I could see a reality where she is very aware of the truth regarding the sword bearers in the Seitei War, and is ultimately like, how can I say this? I apologize. It's ultimately this feeling of like, dude, get over yourself. Like, if anything, it's the people that you harmed, the ones that were like real victims. I'm having a bit of trouble like putting this into words, but ultimately I can just see a reality where she's like that because it's just kind of like tough love. Like, she gets it, but ultimately she knows that there are people that really suffered. And so it's like, yeah, like you killed a bunch of people, boo-hoo, I don't know. It just makes me think of that a little bit, right? And to what extent does she knows what the sword bearers did?
And I mean, it could be out of a parental thing, like and maybe she's just not like sensitive about it. It could just be, because now, like, we know, Iori's 8 at this point, so this could have been an ongoing struggle of hers for 8 years. Look at your daughter, you have something like for the future. And I get that, because like I said, as someone with a kid, I can't imagine like coming home to a place where like my daughter doesn't come run to me when I get home. You know what I mean? And she might just be trying to like tell him like, you have something to live for in this child. Like the rest of your life could be just about, making it right for her. And as a mother, like, I could see a mother fighting for their baby daddy, for the sake of their child. Because Samura is a good man. Like, let's just be real here. Let's keep it a buck. We don't like Samura, and hell, a lot of people still like Samura. But the only reason why we don't like Samura is because he just, clapped Uraha. Right?
That is true.
Like, that's the only reason. He hasn't done, like, think about it. What he did for Chihiro was to try and, like, alleviate the feeling of, like, needing to get revenge. Like, he told Chihiro, just put down the sword. I'll do it. We don't care that he wants to kill the other enchanted blade wielders. Personally, we don't care, because we haven't met them yet. We've met Uraha, and then he did that to him. If we didn't know him, we would have just been like, oh, that sucks. But as like a reader, it's a very contentious character to talk about. The guilt is just eating him alive. So it just comes down to what happens when he hopefully does pop up and sees Iori again.
No, and I agree with you to a degree, because that is true. I personally, I'm kind of like not indifferent about him, because that would be too harsh, but I don't dislike the guy. It's almost like, it's not almost, it's like, I definitely understand his perspective. And I actually really enjoyed when that plot twist was revealed in the story, because it essentially just, makes him a rival to Chihiro with, like you said, like the same goal, but it's ultimately like, who has the right to take on this mission, right? It is kind of weird, but I do agree with you. Like, the only the only reason why some people don't like him is because of what he did to Uraha, which definitely intentional from Hokazono's part, right?
For sure.
But I think he's a solid character, and I think his character ushers this story into what I had been looking forward to since like Sojo was introduced, which is like, what is the truth regarding this war and this Datenseki and like everything about that? Like, it's just there's just so much meat on the bone, the way I see it. And when his reveal kind of took place all those chapters ago, to me was really refreshing because I knew we were going to start getting into some really interesting territory in the story itself. And looking back and seeing how far we've come with Yori and now Yori's backstory, I really have no complaints at all with like what the story's done, because it's humanized Samura even more, while at the same time, to me, kind of making, I don't want to say like it's made him more flawed at the same time, but I just can't help but feel that way. And I really can't put my finger on why that is, but I just can't help but feel that way. Maybe it's just the vulnerability that we see from him in this chapter through Inori, through his interactions with his daughter as well, and even encountering Yura at the end, like you brought up earlier. That I think what's led me to kind of see him in a slightly different light this chapter, and why I wouldn't be surprised if this guy, is taken out of the story soon. Honestly.
Yeah, and one thing that I think we're kind of like jumping all over the chapter, but essentially, beat by beat, it's just him getting closer with, feeling bad that he can't see himself raising a child with the blood on his hands, to then being put in a position where he has to take care of her. And we see that, honestly, I kind of took it as if Yura would have never paid him a visit, Samura may have been able to go forward and just live the rest of his life.
100%. She
reminds me a lot of Samura. How we saw him interact before he was a traitor, like poking Chihiro in the eyes when he was a kid, and just he's childish. Samura was playful, and like he makes an impression, and I felt like Iori was a lot like that as a child. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's very, it's a nice touch what you bring up in terms of how he was kind of playful with Chihiro, because I'm not sure exactly how the timeline lines up, but he was either raising Yori at the same time or had just recently kind of left her behind, which to me only adds like context and layers behind how he's able to interact with Chihiro in such a manner, right? And I don't think that we're led to, I don't think it was a probability or a chance that he might have been ready to move on once Inori passed away. I 100% think that that's what was going to happen. I think when we see her put his arm over her shoulder in that second to last or the last couple of pages, I apologize, before we see Yura, I think that's supposed to symbolize that he was ready to honor Inori's words. He was right then and there. He was ready to put the past behind him. I think the words, "I'll watch over her for you," only emphasize that, right? And to me, that's what makes Yura's presence at the end of the chapter all that much better, because I'm a sucker for kind of perfect timing in stories where you see something about to reach like a certain epiphany, and then something just jumps in and completely wrecks that. And I'm a sucker for that. And that's exactly what I feel that happened in this chapter. He was ready to proceed with his life as Yori's father. And it's not until Yura pulls up that I feel like that puts a wrench in the whole plan, right? And when he has to kind of reevaluate and kind of notice that, no, man, it's like, unlike Yori said, I cannot just walk away from this. I think Yura kind of is there to reinforce that sentiment, like, buddy, you thought you could just walk off into the sunset, kind of like forget your sins and, walk off with your daughter. It ain't like that, and I think that's what we see there, which to me, man, Yura gets some points. Like, Yura does get, to me, some points at the end of this chapter. Like, he's slowly being elevated. And once again, this is nothing special. These are just little subtle moments that, to me, kind of elevate him as a villain. I think Yura's really going to be that final guy.
This chapter, as we talked about, Iori spending this year with Samura, right? And how Inori, like, in a hospital lasted a year. So she was 8, so this would make her about 9. Because I didn't even think about like the timeline implications of all this. Like, we don't know. I don't believe we know what age exactly Samura saw Chihiro, like when Shiba brought him out. I don't think we get that information. Iori seems to be about a year younger than Chihiro. If she's 8, I don't think we've seen like Chihiro that young. I think we kind of just see him all automatically, like, you know, in his teens. That would still mean that he has to visit, like, in between Kunoshige's death and being 9 years old. You know what I mean?
Is Chihiro ever seen at Samura's place? I always thought that Samura went to visit Kunishige.
I took it as that was Shiba taking him out, because I don't necessarily know if Kunoshige necessarily wanted Chihiro to, like, see the enchanted blade wielders.
Yeah, I mean, now you got me thinking, because I know when they first meet, it's kind of by accident, and I think out in public, and it's Samura, because of his scent, he's able to pick up, like, Chihiro. So that was, like you said, kind of out in public. But yeah, I can't really recall if Chihiro, because I know they have the moment when which is probably right after that, actually, when he sees kind of Samura practicing, right, or whatever, when he's able to replicate. I think we get like the reveal with his eyes in that same chapter. I guess I don't really remember if that was in Samura's place or back in Kunishige's.
I don't think that they would have brought Samura there, you know, for his safety. Very few people knew where that was. It's going to be interesting, because I think we are going to get, next chapter is going to be a continuation of this chapter, which I'm hoping means we get some more information, supplemental information about the things that we want to know from Yura's talk with Samura. He only goes visit Samura after they kill Kunoshige. So that means that they're about to get separated. You know, we're about to see the moment that he tells her, or he decides that they have to get separated again. We know for a fact that the best genist Hishaku member says, like, oh, after, you know, Kunoshige's death, Yura went straight to Samura's house to make that pact with him. I can imagine the Kaminabi acting quickly when Kunoshige dies. You know what I mean? So that would mean that Iori, at this point, has been with Samura for 6 years.
She's definitely picked up on the style.
Yeah, by this point. I guess it just comes down to, like, what if Iori actually did hear anything in their talk. Like,
okay, yeah.
The timeline is still a little bit hazy.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that definitely could happen. I would lean towards thinking that what we're going to see from Iori is that she knows the mission that her father's on. So how much she overhears of Yura's conversation with Samura, obviously I don't know, but I would argue, or I would think that she at least heard enough. I wouldn't be surprised to see her know what her father's up to because of her witnessing his conversation with Yura. I wouldn't even be surprised if right after that, like, he never actually said like a proper goodbye.
Yeah, true.
I don't know.
Yo, Yura says, we're just here to talk. Who else is there with Yura?
I didn't pick up on that.
The fact Samura is his whole, like, claim of fame is, you know, he has the senses of a beast. Yura's scent isn't familiar to him.
What do you mean?
Like, you know, Samura smelling Yura, he just says, I don't know who you are. You know, like saying that Yura's a complete stranger, meaning, like, I don't think there's a character in the story that's also like Yura, unless it's like some sorcery thing. But
yeah, I just think there's a lot of uncertainty revolving Yura intentionally, right? I think Yura is just kind of crashing into the scene. The fact that we don't know anything before, like, Kunishige's death, what the hell he was doing, was he part of the Kamunabi, is he from the Shikoku Island? The fact that we don't know anything definitely leads me to believe that he was either operating from the shadows, or there was very few people he had a relationship with. Like, I think Kunishige was definitely one of them. But obviously I have nothing to, like, base that off. It's just like a hunch. But yeah, it's just a lot of uncertainty kind of surrounding Yura.
Yeah, for sure. The biggest thing is what Yura says at, you know, the very last panel.
Yeah, but just before we get into that, because besides that, one of the big takeaways from me for this chapter is gonna be like Yori's response to all of this. Yeah, like I could just see this going a million ways in terms of how Yori now reacts to what we see here, right? Which is her essentially kind of being reminded of, at least we're led to believe that these are all like her memories, like I said earlier, flushing back into her head. And I think there's a lot here that kind of gets me really wondering about what Yori's response is gonna be in terms, one, to like her father, like her response to her father's decision and actions as of late, especially if she's a witness to his conversation with Yura. But also earlier we started this kind of episode talking about her mother, and when it's revealed in this chapter that her mom was died, it did kind of get me thinking earlier, because I was like, wait, like wasn't Yori introduced living with her mom? And so I had to go back. Like I said, my memory is horrible. I had to go back to chapter 61, if I'm not mistaken, and I had to see that she is introduced as living with her mom, and she states that her father died before she was born and that it was her mom that raised her. And obviously we've come to know that it was because her memories were clearly tampered with and whatnot. But I think in chapter 61 is when we see Inuri's sister,
Yeah.
which is probably the person who raised Yori as her quote unquote mom, after Samura kind of left her life. And so that does get me thinking in terms of how Yori's also going to react to basically having been alive to her whole life. Because yeah, that means that the Kamunabi was also, and we might have already known this, but to this extent, I'm not so sure. The fact that the Kamunabi was so, how can I say this? Like just involved in her upbringing. Like, how is Yori going to react to the fact that, one, her mom, that she's, obviously she's now going to remember her real mom, but how is she going to react to the fact that her mom was this Kamunabi agent, which is just essentially her aunt, right? On top of her father's decision to kind of go back on the word he gave as her actual mom, and now, the whole thing he's doing now. It's just very interesting to me. I don't think we're going to get anything. I wouldn't be surprised any route that's taken, right? But I'm not necessarily saying that there's going to be this huge kind of either reveal or like shit's going to go down or anything like that. I'm just curious to see how Yori's character develops from here. Is she kind of accepting of her father's decision? Does it come from like a place of like her understanding what he's had to do, or does she kind of hold it against him? Right? As well as the Kamunabi. How does she see the Kamunabi after knowing that they've been so involved in kind of lying to her this whole time? To me, that's just very interesting to see, and it's just gonna, I'm just curious to kind of witness what happens to Yori's character and how we see her grow and develop from this kind of chain of events.
Like depending on how much she knows, like I said, this is all like it's all circumstantial to like how much she actually knows. We know that she wants to protect the life that she has created. Even if it was a lie, those memories are still, those experiences are still real with her friends. I could see it being a scenario like I'm just not sure which way to go with like how she's gonna maybe reject, like what side is like. Maybe she doesn't reject anything and she just accepts that like this is just the part of the reason why Samura didn't want to get involved with her, because he something like this was would have always been possible just with who he was. And it's like I think a lot of the stuff we just don't know, like, and that's one thing that I think I'm not necessarily like impatient, like the fucking chapters are banging. Just because this is a slower chapter does not mean it's a bad chapter, you know what I mean? I think there's going to be some unruly fans that just want that Kagurabachi action all the time. But the truth is, like, it's chapters like this that give a series like substance, I'm gonna just say it. I'm gonna take a while and I'm not gonna go any further. Let you get your opinion. But I think Samura, is gonna like get clapped within 5 chapters. You don't have to make a statement on that or anything. I just think we're at the conclusion of this part.
Yeah, well, I definitely think he's getting clapped, right? I think he's going out sad, probably, right? Like you said, I wouldn't be surprised if, however his demise ends up taking place, that it's definitely heartfelt, regardless the way Yori reacts to having her memories back. I definitely think he's dying, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's Yura, the one that does it to him. Once again, I see like a slow common trend, which is kind of Yura slowly being, popping up, popping out. And every time he kind of pops into the story, there's this little like incremental role that he takes, even if it's like from the shadows, from behind the curtain, right? But he's kind of stepping into the spotlight, even if it's ever so slightly, ever so subtly. Like I said, I definitely agree that Samura's dying. I don't even know how much like to expect from what's left of this arc, really, because we still haven't met all the sword bearers, right? And so I don't know.
I meant the hotel part, like the conclusion of this like part of the arc itself, just with the conclusion of the hotel itself, I think is going to happen within the next 5.
I can see that, but I wouldn't go as far as to say that that's going to conclude Samura's role in the story. I don't think so. I think Samura is going to go down by the time the arc is coming to an end itself. I don't think we'll see Samura being written out of the story before this sword bearer assassination arc kind of wraps up. That's just what I think. I think he's integral to this arc and just seeing the whole thing kind of play out. And I wouldn't be surprised if he dies towards the finale of the arc.
I want to just some quick things. Inori's like the flowers like around Inori. Keep how those flowers compare to the ones in the last panel.
It's Flowergate.
Like these flowers, just like it looks like some of them are similar flowers. I'm not much of a flower guy, but
yeah, I think. Personally, I think that's probably more of like a visual kind of metaphor type of thing, in the sense that like we see the flowers surrounded by obviously like the portrait once Inori has passed away, and I think that kind of that clearly marks a new period, or at least a new perceived period in Samura's life. And I think by the time we see, because it's not just the fact that they're flowers, but it is kind of a similar looking and similar types of flowers, the ones that we see drawn. Obviously, we know that like the Shinichi has been kind of associated, or not kind of, is straight up been associated with like plant life, and obviously like what we saw in the Rakuzaichi and what we saw kind of with Sojo's backstory a little bit. So I think in terms of what we see around like Inori's portrait is more supposed to be kind of like I don't know if like metaphor is the right word, but I do think it's symbolic. I think it's definitely more like symbolic, that what we see towards the end is Yura kind of coming up, or like pulling up and removing Samura from what he perceived was going to be like the new phase of his life. And so I think kind of like the visualization or the visuals of the flowers, I think is more like a play on that, right? Rather than it being taken as literal. Because like I said, the Shinichi is straight up associated with plant life. We've seen that, and we don't know what the like science or reasoning is behind that, right? But in terms of what we see here, I just think it's it's meant to be purely symbolic, the way I interpret it.
Oh yeah, and let me ask you, do you think that last panel is, do you think that's basically the landscape from Shikoku?
I think it's either that, or it's just like once again symbolic for what Yura is saying, because it's not we see the Swordmaster in the panel right before, right? And Swordmaster, Shinichi, I think there's a clear emphasis on what we're being teased here, which is essentially the massive scale of destruction from the Shinichi, which we know that Yura wants to wield. So this is all kind of coming together nicely. I wouldn't know if whether what we're seeing in that last single spread is what you're saying, like the Shikoku. It would be nice to see whether that's like Shikoku right now or at some point during the war or whatever. But I could also it being seen as like a symbol for what Yura wants to wreak, what Yura wants to do to Japan, right? The havoc he wants to wreak.
Yeah, and like he says, the sins that you lot committed and the disaster that will befall this country as a result a few years from now. Now, remember, this is right after Kunashige died, and there's been 3 years. So technically, this is basically this. Like his whole plan is like basically geared to, like you said, wield the Magatsumi or Shinichi, whatever you want to call it, and it's like this is. I guess that kind of lends itself to like Yura maybe being a Shikoku, and he's from like a native Shikoku. I'm wondering, like, is this basically his saying like I'm gonna do to Japan what y'all came and did to my home, my home country or my island?
I would say almost certainly, right? I don't think we know enough to be able to say with certainty itself, but I would be led to believe that.
Yeah,
which, I said before,
I think that's like the front runner of like theories right now. Is Yura is from Shikoku, and they're like kind of getting their revenge. But yeah, I mean it'll be interesting to see where it all how this like takes shape. I mean, it's just like we said already, and we reiterated a bunch. It could go many different directions. What I want to ask you though is, what direction do you think that chapter 72 goes? Do you think we're gonna get a continuation of this talk?
No, I wouldn't think so. I think it's more likely we kind of come back to Yori and her reaction. Which I think is going to ultimately lead to some little bit of information like like you've been asking for. I think what we're going to see from Yori is perhaps more tidbits of information, at least what I would like to see, right? Is kind of her snap out of it. We're back in present day and kind of getting a little bit more on the war, on Shikoku, or at least on what she saw if she witnessed Samura's and Yura's conversation. So I wouldn't be surprised if she kind of knows, like, for example, where Samura might be going next, or kind of something that now leads the gang to their next location or setting or the next development. That's kind of along the lines of what I'm expecting.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, and I could see that, being the case as well. I'm kind of 50-50 on if we're gonna continue not get the whole story, but if he just shows the part, like maybe when the Masumi gets involved, I think we're gonna get a little bit more next chapter. Not like the whole story, obviously, but I'm hoping we get go a little bit further than this. Like maybe even just see what Samura's like reaction. Like we just see Yura leave, right? Like next chapter starts where Yura leaves. And then that's when, we see his like, internal monologue of thinking, oh, I gotta do this, I gotta do that, like, or whatever the case may be. I'm hoping it continues a bit, but I can definitely see what you're saying as well. I mean, other than that, there's not really much more to talk about. It's a touching chapter for, father embracing his daughter, accepting that he wants to watch over her for, his baby mama's sake. We got other than that, my big thing is I'm just wondering, why does Yura say we're here? I'm wondering who else is. Oh, I'm sorry, I heard something.
It's it's probably the Hishaku, right? They're either lurking or they haven't teleported or hiding. I don't know. But it's I would be surprised if Yura just pulled up by himself, really, like completely by himself, just like, because we know Samura's he's no spring chicken, like in the sense, like he's also he's one of the swordsmen for God's sake, you know, like,
Yeah,
so he wasn't pulling up alone, you know, Yura was not pulling up alone regardless.
actually,
So
and he's very calculated. He's a calculated individual, so that's what I think I like most about Yura is he's been shown, like when we meet him, his whole introduction is like he's flexing on Chihiro without using sorcery, and you know, like it's like, but then as we see him going forward, it's almost like he's kind of the strategist, you know, like, you know, he's making the plans. He's not a powerhouse. So I can't wait to see. Yura's probably the character I'm most excited for, honestly. Anything thoughts going forward? Anything you're excited for specifically? I mean, there's a lot.
Yeah, I guess right now just Yori's development. Like I said, I went from not being a huge fan of the way the whole kind of reveal was handled, and now that's kind of like the one thing I'm looking for this arc. Right, like I said, Seitei War and everything else aside, it's Yori's development. Like Yori's development, what has me intrigued.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, she's a cool character. It's gonna be, I think, seeing the inklings of her true character will be shown when we get to cut back to like present time. Like I'm waiting to see that Yori, but yeah, I think like she's made Chihiro's character better. Essentially, for me, like just how he is still 10 toes about like valuing the time with Kunishige and all that.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, but I mean, that'll do it for me.
Yeah, man, that's all for me as well.
All right, but I think that'll do it for us. Appreciate you guys. Make sure to like and subscribe and all that. Other than that, Dice, closing statement.
Yeah, man. Make sure you guys leave a comment in terms of what you guys are looking forward to the most, or at least what you enjoyed about this chapter.
All right, that'll do it. See y'all guys later. Peace.